それでは、飯島委員にちょうどついていただきまして、ちょうど定刻になりましたので、ただいまから第6回のエネルギー情勢懇談会を開催いたします。本日は、白石委員がご欠席でございます。それから五ノ上委員が途中から参加をいたします。世耕経済産業大臣、今日本当は最初から出席予定だったんですけれども、予算委員会の審議が少し長引いておりまして、おそらくですね、3時過ぎぐらいにご到着の予定というようにお聞きしています。よろしくお願いいたします。で、今回は前半と後半の2つに分けて、審議を進めさせていただきます。前半につきましては、地球温暖化に対してのそのドイツの取り組みについて、お話をいただきます。ドイツの話につきましては、なかなか議論する機会が充営されたわけでございますけれども、本日フェリックス・マッテスさんにお越しいただいて、ご説明をいただくということになります。ご紹介いたします。フェリックス・マッテスさんでございます。Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the kind invitation to have me here in this fascinating country.
Before your presentation, I want to tell something.
Okay.
マットさんは現在、欧州委員会のエネルギー総局に所属をしてございまして、2050年までの欧州全体のエネルギーロードマップの策定に参加された方でございます。マッティスさんには、本日プレゼンテーションをしていただく前にですね、委員の皆様、そして我々の関心について質問事項という形で、投げかけさせていただいてございます。資料2をご確認ください。資料2で、地球温暖化に関する関連の事項をマッティスさんに質問事項としてお渡しして、事前にお渡ししてございます。特にドイツに関しましては、再生可能エネルギーの進捗について、これは日本よりも先んじてフィット制度を導入して、先行をしているという状況でございますので、それに関連するご質問を投げてございます。例えば、括弧1では、フィット制度に関する評価と今後の対応について、どう考えているか。括弧2では、ドイツでは電力の供給地である北部、それから重要地の南部、ここの送電網の整備についての課題があると認識してございますけれども、そういった再エネの大量導入に伴うその送電線の再構築についてどう考えていらっしゃるか。あるいは括弧4でございますけれども、ドイツでは石炭火力の依存度がまだ高いわけでございますけれども、中長期的なカーボンフリー戦略については、どのような見通し、評価をなされているか、といった点でございます。一番下にございますけれども、運輸部門における電化の進展、これはイギリス、フランスなどはですね、ガソリンディーゼル車の製造販売禁止の方針というものを打ち出されているわけでございますけれども、運輸部門に関する電化について、どのような見通しをなされているかといったご質問をしてございます。それから議論の一助として資料3をご覧ください。事務局の方から示している資料でございます。資料3でございます。地球温暖化についてというものでございますけれども、ポイントだけ、簡潔にご説明をさせていただきますが、まず、8ページをご覧ください。8ページをご覧ください。よろしいでしょうか。8ページはドイツの長期戦略のサマリーでございます。50年に向けた対応ということでございますけれども、削減目標は 1990年比80から 95% 削減、温室効果ガスの削減でございます。この長期戦略の位置づけは、排出削減に向けた方向性を提示しているもの、必ずしもそのコンクリートなプランということではございませんけれども、方向性を提示したものということで、例えばそのゼロエミッションについては、再生可能エネルギーを50年で 80% まで拡大することを目指す。省エネについても2050年に向けて 50% 半減する、そういったレベルを目指すというものがポイントとして挙げられます。それから10ページをご覧ください。10ページは、これはドイツの CO2 の排出量の推移でございまして、一度ご説明もいたしましたが、2010年から15年、真ん中と右側を見ていただきますと、需要については、顕著に伸びてございます。特に再生可能エネルギーの割合が急激に増えていること、原子力については、その発電量を抑制して減らしていることがございます。火力につきましては、石炭も含めて横ばい、微減という状況でございます。したがいまして、CO2 の排出量は、全体としては横ばいのレベルと、2010年から15年にかけてほぼ横ばいというペースで続いているということでございます。それから16ページをご覧ください。最近のその電力の需要とその内訳が先ほど説明したようなことでございますので、ドイツにおけるその CO2 の排出係数というのは1キロワットアワーあたり450グラムの CO2 というレベルでございまして、これは右から2番目に書いてありますけれども、右から3番目に書いてございます EU の平均と比べても高い状態にあるということでございます。それから19ページをご覧ください。19ページはドイツにおける電力需給と調整力、それから電力の国外との輸出入について、これあるちょっと時点でございますけれども、2017年の4月の29から4月の30日を見たときの需要と供給の構造でございます。左側のグラフを見ていただければと思います。黒い線で書いてあるのは、これは需要の曲線でございます。この需要に相対する形で供給の内訳を書いているというものでございます。これ橙色で一番上になるのが太陽光でございまして、4月29日、30日の12時ぐらいはやはり太陽光の発電量が増えているということでございます。で、需要より増えている部分、これ太陽光の部分ございますけれども、ここの部分については、本来的な需要と供給一致していることが不可欠でございますけれども、このオーバーした橙色の太陽光の部分、こういったこの供給のオーバーした部分につきましては、下にゼロというラインがありますけれども、その下に輸出というところがございます。これは送電網を活用して国外へ輸出をした状況になってございます。こういった国外との融通を状況に応じて行っているというものでございます。一方で4月の29と30の真ん中にございますけれども、ちょうど夜中ぐらいのところでございますが、ここは需要に対して供給が十分に追いつきませんでしたので、若干の輸入を送電網を通して国外から行っているということでございます。こういった輸出入を送電網を介して柔軟に行っているという特徴がございます。それからその次のページ、20ページでございますけれども、デンマークの例を挙げさせていただいています。でデンマークはドイツと比べますと電力の需要量は20分の1ほどでございます。小規模ではございますけれども、非常に今風力が伸びていまして、風力の発電量が増えてございます。で、この風力の需要の伸びが、風力の供給が非常に増えているところ、ここにつきましては、輸出をするという形で、送電網を介して国外に融通をしているということでございます。最後に21ページでございます。 今のその電力の輸出入の状況でございますが、デンマークは年間300億キロワットアワーの需要規模、ドイツが6000億、20分の1、20倍の関係でございます。変動再エネの比率は、デンマークは50% を超えている状況でございますし、調整力の国外依存ということでは、その輸出入が非常に多いときは 80% を国外とのやり取りをしているということになります。ドイツはその域までは達してございませんけれども、変動再エネの比率が約2割、調整力での海外とのやり取りは4割を占めているということでございます。残念ながら日本は国外と送電網でつながっている状態ではございませんので、こういったやり取りはしにくいということになってございますし、むしろこういった送電網を活用することによって、変動再エネを柔軟に導入することができているというのがデンマーク、ドイツについては読み取れるということかと思います。それでは、マッティスさんのプレゼンテーションに移りたいと思います。よろしくお願いします。
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for having me here and inviting me to this fascinating country. I have been here many times and coincidentally also at a day which was important not only for the energy policy of your country but also of my country. Coincidentally, I was here on the 11th of March in 2011, in another government building here. And again, so this event, this terrible earthquake has changed energy policy in your country and in my country. I would like to present you some insights on the recent progress, but also the shortfalls and the prospects of German energy and climate policy. In each country there is light and shadow, and I will try to highlight some of the interesting things. You have provided me with a questionnaire which was very comprehensive and exceeds the 20 minutes presentation time, and therefore I have produced a paper here, a longer paper, which is full of the data which build the background of my presentation, and so I will rush through some of the issues which are important. I also would like to comment on some of the findings here, but we can probably do this during the presentation. I need to make two preliminary remarks. I work in an independent research organization which has worked with the German government and European institutions for the last 27 years on developing energy and climate policy programs. We do a lot of modeling for the German government. However, although the German government and the European institutions are funding my work, this is my private opinion, my private views, no official position of Germany, neither of the European Union, which frankly might be more interesting for you. And you can see here there the QR code where you can download the long paper. The second preliminary remark is that if you really look to energy transition or energy transformation in Germany, then you should have a broader view. It is obviously a target-driven energy and climate policy approach. That is the main focus, but you can't understand the results as the progress as well as the shortfalls if you don't have a look on the neighboring policy fields. The first neighboring policy field is the liberalization and the restructuring of the European energy market, which is an important point which you need to understand if you want to understand German energy policies and German climate policy. Secondly, it is the policy of an early mover. So not all the issues which we faced in the past and which we will face in the future will occur also for other countries, especially if it comes to costs. So we have spent a lot of money in learning, but this only partly will occur also for other countries. And the third is there is a broader framework of European energy policy, but also in a general governance framework. Germany is a decentralized country with a lot of decentral tradition, with 900 municipal utilities, with a long tradition in cooperatives. And without these two additional pillars, or the three additional pillars, you can't understand German energy and climate policy. So there's a target-driven policy at the core, but there is the European-driven liberalization policy. There is the overarching governance strategy in terms of decentralization, and thirdly, there is an embedding into the European policy. And in the end of the day, it's a learning by doing process. So the interesting experience, and again, I said this before, I'm in this business for 27 years, so many of the things where we thought they would constitute major problems have played out to be no problems, and in other points we have experienced problems where nobody thought before that there even a problem could exist. And so it's a learning by doing, and I think this is the only way to do this. We have some problems with the legally binding policy approach. I will come back to this later. We are just in the process to transform the government targets which built the framework for German energy policy into a legally binding framework. The new government has made in the coalition treaty a statement that they will go for a climate act which makes all these targets legally binding. The other thing is, we had a lot of discussion on technologies. I think for the 80% emission reduction, and that means for the next 20 to 30 years, we have all technologies available, or we can see them in the pipeline. This is not longer a technological problem. What we also see is, if we leave aside the learning investments from the years from 2000 to 2010, all energy systems in the future will have approximately the same system costs. There's a lot of modeling in Germany, there's a lot of modeling in the European Union, and all this modeling leads to one result. Whatever the choice is, the system costs will be somehow comparable. So there are small differences, but whatever the way is and whatever the uncertainties are, the costs will be approximately the same. There will be different risks, there will be different carbon emissions, but the cost will be the same. And that means that the real challenge is not of technological or economic nature. The real challenge is managing structural change. Structural change in 4 dimensions. Number one, with regard to changing characteristics of technologies, more decentralized, more variable, more distributed, etc., etc. Secondly, changing structure of cost. We are facing a system which is much more capital intensive than all our traditional energy system have been. And this puts forward a major question how we deal with a system which has low or even no short-term marginal cost and consists essentially of capital cost. The third is that there needs to be a structural change, a structural change needs to be managed in terms of players or market participants. We run the German electricity system for 70 years with 300 generation units. Last summer we had 1.8 million generation units, and in the future we will have a system which consists of 10 million generation units, 10 million demand response, etc., etc., which tables 2 questions. How to coordinate the system, this is a market design system, and secondly, how to realize that a part of the energy system will be shifted from an investment good to a consumption good with totally different appraisals, etc., etc. And the fourth and very important point are these changing spatial structures. And that means there is a need for other infrastructures, changing infrastructures for all the 4 infrastructures which have a link to energy policy: electricity infrastructures, heat infrastructures, gas infrastructures, and IT infrastructures. There was a question on the future of remuneration mechanisms for renewables. We pay a lot of money. We paid a lot of money in the past for investments in renewables. We spent at the moment in the German remuneration scheme, in the tendering scheme, between 40 and 60 euros per megawatt hour, which is at the level of levelized cost of energy. It is comparable to all or even cheaper than the alternatives. So there was a huge role for the feed-in tariffs, and there might be an interim phase where we don't have to rely on systems like feed-in tariffs, etc., etc. But on the long run, we will need remuneration mechanisms for the renewables, as we will do this for the flexibility options. Because if in future the wind is blowing and the sun is shining, the prices in the electricity markets will be zero, and therefore the revenue for the investors will be zero. And therefore we need for the renewables, as we will need for firm capacity, demand response and storage, own segments of markets which remunerate the investment. And I think this is a key issue, and we will need these for a very long time. Having said this, there might be an interim phase where we don't need it. And you might have heard that the last offshore tenders for Germany have resulted in zero bids. That means investors assume that offshore wind farms can be refinanced from the revenues from the traditional energy markets. But that will be for the next 10 to 15 years, and not for the 20 to 30 years. We have a situation, and that is an important point if it comes to infrastructure. Germany is heavily interconnected in the European market, but this is an asset, is a benefit. It is also a challenge, and it is a burden. It is the benefit because it is a cheap flexibility option. The figures which were shown there on the electricity exports and imports of Germany and Denmark, this has nothing to do with surplus or deficit. It has to do with the market. Because then if we export a lot of electricity, then the short-term marginal cost of German electricity power generation is cheaper than in the neighboring countries. And the situation that we have this flexibility option allows us to maintain a certain share of inflexible generation. You have also seen that even in the system, even in the situation where generation options with short-term marginal cost of zero were able to deliver almost the whole electricity that nuclear and coal and part of gas has produced. That is only the point that the short-term marginal cost of these generation units have been cheaper than in the neighboring countries, and so it is exported. Secondly, the challenge is the transport, and that's the more important point, because in terms of flexibility, there are also alternatives. We have done extensive modeling where we cut down all the interconnections, and you can run the system. There's another economics in the system, but you can run this. But the thermal power generation needs to be much more flexible than it is at the moment. That means the flexibility provided by the network integration allows us to afford a significant share of inflexible generation in the system. But there are obviously alternatives. The challenge is the transport. We are changing the spatial patterns of generation, and we need to bring a lot of wind from the north to the south, which is a totally different generation pattern than we have seen this before. And there we need to build we need to build new infrastructure, and we face major delays with this infrastructure. But there's also a third point why this network integration is a burden, because it allows high carbon exports. One of the reasons that the CO2 emissions from the German power generation have not decreased is we had a lot of additional renewables which have more than offset the decrease in nuclear, but the export option allowed us that we today export 9% of the generation, and that means 9% of coal-fired generation to neighboring countries. And if you remove this, if you reflect this, then without these export, we would be very close to meet the national CO2 emission reduction target. And so that's also a burden, and it stands for 50 million tons of additional CO2, which is not emitted in neighboring countries but in Germany, because we are exporting 9% of our national production. There is a huge need for flexibility options, and essentially what we will need to do in the future is nothing else than what we did in the past. The only interesting point is that base load and medium load will almost disappear when we have large shares of renewables. So that means we will need to fill the gap with the technologies we used in the past to deliver peak load. That means flexible gas-fired power generation. So, and the flexibility, so it's nothing new. So it is essentially the same what we did in the past. The only challenge which will occur if the German government decides to go not for 80% emission reduction, but for 95% emission reduction. If we can't afford the combustion of natural gas on the long run, then we will need to have a lot of batteries and other flexibility options. But this is a solvent thing, and we need to think about what are the different phases for the next years. Existing power generation and gas-fired power generation will jump in if renewables won't deliver. Meeting the climate targets is one of the key challenges. We have a mixed experience, a mixed record on climate targets. We have missed the 2005 target. We have met the 2011 and 2008 to 2012 target. We will probably miss the 2020 target because of the major coal-fired export. This is the major reason, which is the reason why we probably will miss the 2020 target. But missing the 2020 target was the trigger that the new coalition has decided to go for legally binding targets. That will not occur again in future. So there have been action, there was action taken to deal with this. There is an issue with the transport sector, which is the other reason why we probably will miss the 2020 target. Besides the electricity or the high carbon electricity export, there's almost no contribution to greenhouse gas emissions reduction since 1990 because the German government was not courageous enough to make tough decisions on to bring in new technologies and to phase out the old, especially the diesel-based strategy. The diesel-based strategy was thought to be the main pillar to deliver greenhouse gas emission reduction targets, but it has not delivered because the rebound effects have totally offset the higher efficiency of the diesel engine. So the people, the consumers bought heavier cars, and so there was no emission reduction. However, having said this, we see encouraging signals. Last year, the sales of electric vehicles have doubled, and according to Bloomberg New Energy Finance, Germany next year or this year, 2018, will be the biggest or the third biggest market in terms of electric vehicles worldwide after China and the United States. So my last slide is. My last slide for the last 2 minutes is a very short overview on the German energy transition according to the 4 strategies I think are crucial for every effective energy transformation pathway. The first is paving the way for energy efficiency, clean generation, and flexibility. So, and Germany has been strong strong on this. We have rolled out the renewables. We have mixed experiences with energy efficiency. We have mixed experiences with clean heating, and we have bad experiences with zero emission transport. There need to be much more significant efforts. The key issue is, and that is one of the fields that has to do with market design and liberalization. It is about creating a sustainable economic basis of the future energy system, which delivers both coordination based on price signals and remuneration of investments. And that applies for all sectors. The second strategy, and that is probably the biggest gap for Germany, is that there is a need to design the exit game for the high carbon and non-sustainable capital stock. It is not enough to bring in the clean options. The exit game needs to be designed, and the German coal story tells this very clear. There need to be a coal phase-out trajectory. The new coalition treaty says there will be an end date for the coal-based power generation in Germany, and there will be a commission who will make decisions on the trajectory of the coal phase-out in this country, because the lack in the strategy of designing the exit game for the high-carbon asset has been the major cause that we will miss probably the 2020 target. It is not enough to push in the clean options. There need to be a clear strategy to design the exit game for the non-sustainable capital stocks. The third strategy, from my perspective, is triggering the necessary infrastructure adjustments with sufficient lead times. So we will need other networks, more smart networks, but also upgraded networks if it comes to electricity, but also if it comes to heat and gas. And the challenge with all these infrastructures, there need to be tough decisions made, and these decisions will have a crucial impact what the key technologies in future will be. But at least in my country, infrastructure adjustment have a lead time of 15 years. That means you need to have a longer-term plan for the next 15 to 20 years to make the right infrastructure decisions. And these decisions might be wrong, but they need to be done. Because without these infrastructure decisions, no option will fly. And so we have major delays, and this is a major gap in German energy and climate policy. Fourth strategy is making innovation work in time. There is a need for innovation, but there are different innovation needs for different phases. For the first 30 to 40% of emission reduction, we need other innovation than for the 50, 60, 70, 80, 90%, and for the 95% even more. And being not confused which innovation needs to play a major role in which phase is important. So phasing the approach and not mixing future options with the options which can be done immediately, which are available and matured and cost effective, is an important point. So, and if you go to German energy conferences, you are overwhelmed with the portfolio of innovation which is available and which will be available. This is the good news. The bad news is that policymakers somehow tend to mix the jokers from the trump. And everybody who plays poker who knows first the trump and then the joker. And to identify the jokers is important. If you ask me what is the glass, half empty or half full, definitely the glass, if it comes to the German energy transition, is half full. Not more, but also not less. And what you really can see that we are facing a painful debate how to deal with the missed target in 2040. But I'm pretty optimistic that policymakers have learned the lesson because this is an experience as the experiences we made at very many other occasions in the system that is all about learning by doing. It's about time, and so I would like to thank you for your attention, and I will be happy to discuss all this stuff again. There are many data and many papers and many graphs in my written statement. I will be happy to discuss these issues and also other issues on German and also European energy and climate policies for the short, medium, and long term. Thank you very much.
マッティさん、ありがとうございました。非常に包括的で濃密なプレゼンテーションをいただきました。それでは自由討議質問に移りたいと思います。委員の皆様からご質問等あれば、いつものようにネームプレートを立てていただいてというようにお願いします。それでは、お三方がいきなり立ちましたけど、じゃあ、飯島委員から。ちょっと飯島委員、枝広委員、中西委員の順番でいきたいと思います。
松さん、ありがとうございました。ドイツの場合、石炭火力の発電比率が高いんでですね、この石炭の観点から、2、3ご質問させていただきたいと思います。まずですね、EU でですね、プラットフォームコールリージョンズ・エン・トランジションが、昨年12月に設立をされました。これはCOP23 の時にですね、パワーリングパーストコールアライアンスとの関係はどういうふうになっているのか、またこの関連でですね、今後ドイツおよび EU のですね、石炭産業およびそれに伴う雇用についてですね、石炭火力を今後縮小していくんだと、カーボンを減らしていくんだと、カーボン源の発電源は減らしていくんだという流れの中でですね、この石炭産業および雇用、直接雇用だけでもですね、ポーランドをはじめとしてヨーロッパでは18万5千人ぐらいの雇用があると、ドイツでも2万5千人ぐらいと、またこれに関連する間接的な石炭火力発電といったところの産業に従事している雇用等々を考えたときにですね、この産業転換についてですね、国ごとに、形は違うと思うんですけれども、その辺は EU として、ドイツとしてどのように考えておられるのか。それからヨーロッパではですね、今、マティスさんは、あらゆる技術は、もうクリアされてるんだというお話を伺ったんですけれども、CCS について、取り組みが若干遅れているというような報告を受けているんですけれども、これは CCS は技術的に取り組みが遅れているのか、それとも CCS に適した、貯留に適した CO2 を貯留する適地がなかなか EU にはない、またドイツにはない、そういう意味では貯留キャパシティの問題があるのか、その辺をお伺いさせていただきたいと思います。
Yeah, three questions. The first is coal will be phased out in Europe sooner or later. You might have seen the statement of Euroelectric, which is the association of the European power utilities. They have said no new coal. And there have been two countries which have not signed up to this, is Greece and Poland. But essentially all the European countries, the policymakers, and even the utilities know that coal is a phase-out issue. And I think with coal you need to, and if it comes to Germany, you need to bear in mind that we have a fleet of coal-fired power generators, which is comparatively extreme. We have one half of the capacity which is 30, 40, 50 years old, and the other half is pretty young. So, and the key issue is to balance, to bring out the old part of the fleet, and then how to deal with the new build which have been built during the last, let's say, 10 years. And this is one of the questions where we need to discuss on compensations, etc., etc. But everybody knows in Germany, if the power generation makes 40% of the national emissions, and if 80% of the power sector emissions comes from coal, then there is no way to maintain significant shares of coals, let's say, beyond 2035. And other countries are even faster, but frankly speaking, you need to consider that these are mostly countries which had a relatively small share of coal, except the UK, which had a large share in the past. But so the only country where there's still a lot of discussion how coal can be reduced is Poland. Secondly, with the employment, you need to consider that in Germany the coal industry has already gone through a major transition process. 40 years ago, the German coal industry employed 500,000 people. 500,000. In the end of this year, the last hard coal mine will be shut down. And so we have remaining 20,000 employees in the lignite mining. So, and the key issue is, and that is part of a lot of discussions, and you might have seen that during the last reform of the European Union emissions trading system, there will be funds available to help these regions to transform, because it is not about the number of employees, it is about the hotspots. So these lignite mining areas are concentrated partly, not all, but partly in very poor regions. And the key issue there is, and that German policymakers learned very slowly, that especially if you consider these regions, you need to have an accountable phase out trajectory because to give them the possibility to adjust. Because sooner or later coal needs to be phased out, and probably sooner than later. And so a certain steady adjustment process is of enormous importance. And I think this faces a huge overarching problem. There will be changes in the energy system. The key issue is, will the nature of this change be disruptive, or will it be more steady? There's not yet a clear answer to this. The change will be there in the coal sector and the transport sector. The only question is, how disruptive will it be, and what is better for the regions, disruptive adjustments or more steady adjustments? And so it's a limited number of jobs. It's important for some regions, and in Germany, frankly, only one of the three lignite mining regions are sensitive to this. This is a very eastern part of Germany, very poor, etc. So CCS is an interesting question. The technological progress which has been made with CCS, with the pilot projects, was encouraging. However, there have been essentially three reasons why the most of the EU projects have stopped, although there was a lot of funding for it available. The first is that the progress with the renewables has presented an alternative. And if you consider CCS in the power sector, these are inflexible power stations, because you have a huge power stations, and combined with the huge power station, you have a huge chemical plant, and these are not the flexible plants which are the complements to renewables. And so there have been increasingly questions if this is a good idea. How suitable is this? Secondly, we have a major problem with public acceptance at the storage sites, and more important, at the transportation sites, because you need a new infrastructure in terms of CO2 pipelines, etc., and essentially all European countries, simply the public acceptance have not been there. And even the last big funding approach of the EU for a British project failed, because the regions in the UK have not allowed the permitting of the CO2 pipeline. And therefore it is, for the time being, there is no major progress. Personally, I think there is a future, and there's a need to deal with carbon capture and storage if it comes to industrial emissions. Because if it comes to the steel industry, if it comes to the cement industry, there are only a few alternatives to the application of CCS. And one of the major failures of the German energy policy was to link the CCS debate to the coal debate. Because the narrative, this is an option to prolong the lifetime of the coal. And therefore, those industries where it is nothing is without alternative, but where there are only few alternatives, so the steel industry, cement industry, and even net sinks in combination with biofuel production, which is already mature technology, and these three technologies have been pushed out of the debate, because the debate in Europe on CCS has been a debate on coal, and that shouldn't be done. So from my perspective, we need a cool down phase of, let's say, 10, 15 years, but if we are going for for a more ambitious climate or greenhouse gas emission reduction targets, we will need to deal with CCS, and all the modeling, even for Germany, on the 95% emission reductions includes CCS for process emissions and includes CCS to use the pure CO2 which comes out of the biofuel production facilities to create net sinks.
ありがとうございます。それでは枝広委員お願いします。
ありがとうございました。ドイツから学べることはいろいろたくさんあると思うんですが、ぜひ今日お聞かせいただきたいことはですね、地域のエネルギーということです。シュタットベルケというのがドイツではよく、話に出るんですが、大きく作ってそれぞれに配ると配電するというのではなくて、それぞれの地域でエネルギーを自分たちで生産して使っていくと、そのシュタットベルケのような形で自治体もしくは地域が自分たちのエネルギーを作って管理していくというのが今後の日本にとっても必要な道ではないかと思っています。今日のプレゼンテーションにはその点が入っていなかったので、シュタットベルケについて、そして特にそういった動きを促進するための政策としてどういったものが有効かで、シュタットベルケなどによって地域でそれぞれ作られているエネルギーがドイツの中だと割合としてどれぐらいになっているのか、さらにそれを広げていくお考えがあるのかというのが1点目です。あと2つ質問があります。2点目の質問は、ベースロードという考え方が消えていくというのは非常に興味深く、そうだなと思って聞いていました。で、日本もおそらく今はベースロードという考え方がまだありますが、再生可能エネルギーがもっと大きく入ってくるときに、ベースロードという考え方からシフトしていく必要があると思っています。で、実際にその再エネの割合がどれぐらいに来るとベースロードという考え方ではなくなってくるのか、そしてそういう時代が来ることを日本として見越したときに、どのような制度もしくは技術、それを今から考えておく必要があるのか、それを教えてください。3点目、最後の質問です。一番最後にイノベーションがフェーズによって必要なものが違ってくるというお話がありました。で、その通りだと思います。で、それを区別することが大事だと。例えばドイツの場合もしくは EU の場合、最初のフェーズではどういうイノベーション、次は最後はそのようなイノベーションのグループ分けをもうすでになさっているのか、その情報がどこかにあるとしたらどこを見ればよいかご示唆いただければと思います。以上です。
Yeah, thank you very much. I said in my introductory remark that Germany has a long tradition of decentralized activities. But if it comes to renewables, frankly speaking, the vast majority of the capacity has not been built by the big utilities, neither by the small utilities. If you go to my paper on page 25, there is a breakdown of the ownership structure of the renewable capacity, and there you can see that the major four utilities, the major generators, which owned 80% of the conventional generation, owned 4% of the total renewable capacity. The Stadtwerke, the other utilities, are also own only 7% of the installed capacity. So the Stadtwerke stand for 20% of the conventional generation and approximately 30% of the sales. That means 88% of the renewable capacity has been built by non-traditional investors. That means by individuals, by farmers, by industry, by banks, by other utilities. And I think one of the reasons, therefore, was that especially in the first phase, creating a level playing field played a major role. There has been the feed-in tariff as a very comfortable mechanism. We have probably a little bit overdone this with the feed-in tariff, and we should have done the transformation to the tendering system probably 4 years before. But this early phase, and I would always recommend for the first, let's say, 15 to 20% of renewables, you need a remuneration mechanism that is very robust, that makes it attractive for new players in the market. Because there's a huge role of the non-technical infrastructure. You need designers, you need engineers, you need banks, you need consultants, you need accountants, you need lawyers. And without these non-technical infrastructure, it won't fly. So that means my first answer to your question is that the role of the Stadtwerke in the first phase has been limited, as it has been for the traditional utilities. However, the role of the municipality utilities increases at the moment significantly because the distribution networks, which are mostly owned by municipal utilities, play a key role when it comes to flexibility. So transforming distribution grids to smart distribution grids, and at the moment these are not smart distribution grids, is a major challenge to get flexibility options beyond the simple rolling out infrastructures. So, and there the municipal utilities will play a major role because these are the enterprises who need to deal with the distribution networks. And the third answer is, besides the remuneration mechanisms, what has been one success factor is the level playing field for getting access to the grid. And so the unbundling, or if you ask me for a short answer why the rollout of renewables has been so successful, I would say 40% because of the feed-in tariff. Okay, partly overdone, a little bit expensive, but okay, it was worth the price. Another 30%, the unbundling from the restructuring process, because there was a right for each investor to get connected to the grid, which has created a level playing field for all these new investors, which are not used to do major investments. And the remaining 30% come from the tradition of municipal utilities and cooperatives and all these, let's say again, non-technical framework, which has been simply applied to the energy sector. And I think only the combination of these three points is the background. However, if you are beyond the 20 to 25%, the challenges differ, and there is a more mixed view, because decentral actors, they have certain advantages. They have lower implementation risk. They have usually lower requirements for rate of return, and they have lower or better regional knowledge, etc., etc. On the other hand, they have smaller portfolios. They have no economies of scale, etc., etc. And the key issue is, and we are struggling with this very much, how to design auctions for renewables which allow access for these different type of players. And we are still in a very hard learning process. We had some trials, and there were very, very difficult results. But I think one of the key issues is to formulate a broad participation and also a broad economic participation as an own goal. So that is one of the key issues. Is there's not only a goal, we want to decrease carbon emissions, we want to increase renewables, but there's also a separate goal which regularly states we want to have as much participation as possible. And I think this is an important point for designing the markets. The baseload, I think this I included in my paper in the pages 22 to 24 some modeling results, and you can see that probably in Germany around 2030 baseload will have disappeared. In 2030 the targets we have at the moment is 55% approximately, and that means if you are exceeding the 30%, then the role of base load will be extremely limited. If you are exceeding the 50%, even a part of the medium load will disappear. And again, so I got my first education as an electrical engineer, and when I was studying electrical engineering at the time, then we had another notion of base load. We have today also in German politics, so there is a myth of a baseload demand. There is no baseload demand. There is a demand to deliver supply in each quarter of an hour of the year. Baseload is an opportunity. Baseload is an opportunity for power plants where the economics depends on the fact that you can run these plants 8,000 hours a year. And if this opportunity disappears, then there is no longer place for baseload in the system. And I think this is an important point. Third, on the innovation, that is a 3 hours talk, but I would say, let's say we have, for the first phase, or Germany is just at the turn from the first phase to the second phase. The key issue is, let's say, flexibility. Flexibility in terms of power generation, but also flexibility in power generation. And there's a huge and very cheap potential which comes from modularization. What see, I think modularization in the energy sector is a mega trend which is comparable to containerization in transport. We have, for example, one major aluminium smelter in Germany. So it's one of, it's a very inflexible energy consumption. And these guys are rebuilding their aluminium smelter in smaller modules which still have a constant energy use, but can be switched on and switched off more flexible because it's organized in smaller modules. And therefore, I think there will be a shift from the economies of scale to the economies of modularization. And I think this is one key issue for many fields, and to switch immediately to the very long term. So on a very long term, the challenge is how to deal with what we call the novel fuels. So that means what do we do with hydrogen in the system? Is there a potential for power-based liquids? Is there a potential for synthetic methane? But this is on a very long term, and it essentially depends on the targets. There's no need for this type of new or novel fuels if we stay with the 80% emission reduction. But if we go for full decarbonization, there will be a need for hydrogen and other novel fuels. And fortunately, we have 15 years left to do all the research on this. But I think around 2030, we need to have technologies in place which are matured in terms of technology. But it's, at least our view is on these novel fuels that a big chunk of these novel fuels will be imported. And that tables issues, how do we do with market monopolies? So we have at the moment a couple of oil suppliers, but how many hydrogen suppliers will we have? 1 or 2? What does it mean for security of supply? What does it mean in terms of freshwater sustainability criteria, which are very comparable to the biomass import debate, etc., etc. And so it is not only about technological innovation; it is also about building the foundations for these type of technologies in the international scene. And this is more a foreign policy issue than an energy policy issue. But if we don't go for this foreign policy to solve these foreign policy issues, then these fuels will be not available.
ありがとうございます。じゃあ、中西委員、坂根委員、山崎委員といきます。少し時間が押しておりますので、少しずつコメントします。すみません。
どうもありがとうございました。で、グリッドについては、リードタイムが長いということで、長期的な展望が非常に重要だというお話を伺いまして、私も同感なんですけれども、ただこれ、日本の場合もそうなんですけれども、グリッドによるそのメリットというかベネフィットがですね、誰が受け取るかっていうのがそうクリアじゃなくて、どういうふうにして投資をし、どういうふうにしてリターンをするのか、得るのかっていう、 そこを明確にしないと従来のグリッドとですね投資家のスキームがだいぶ変わるんではないかというふうに思うんですけども、特に先ほど申し上げましたがフレキシビリティのベネフィットを受け取る側っていうのは随分プレイヤーも変わってくると。その辺特にグリッドの長期面での投資についてどうお考えでいらっしゃるかを教えていただきたいと思います。
I think long-term investment in grids is a non-brainer because of two reasons. It's a regulated business. That means you have low capital cost and you have depreciation over very long periods. And so I think in the case of Germany, for the, let's say, first 50% of renewables, investments in grids, in smart grids, is a non-brainer. And after these first 50%, there needs to be a debate on how to design a level playing field between the different flexibility options. But these flexibility options will be market-driven. And that means with private interest rates, depreciation for 5, 6, 7 years and not 40 years. And so the financing, the capital cost of these non-grid flexibility options will be on a regular basis more expensive. Having said this, there are some very attractive flexibility options also on the short term, modularization, demand response, power to heat, but that will never offset the advantages from heat. Because again, if the system is that grids are not built by merchants, if they are built on the regulatory framework of natural monopolies, this is regulated monopoly, and the financing structures and the capital costs are very preferential on this. However, and this is one of the heated debates we have, what is the regulatory framework for the regulation of the natural monopolies? Is it incentive regulation? Is it about investment budgets, etc., etc.? So there are many nitty-gritty details which need to be solved, because the network regulation we have traditionally comes from the core belief, or the starting point, we got all the grids from the good old monopoly times. The grids are oversized. And so all the regulatory attempt is to squeeze out the grid operators, which is also fine for the first phase after the liberalization. But at some point in time, when it comes to investments, then we need other regulatory approaches than, for example, incentive regulation, to have stronger and smarter grids.
では昨年お願いします。
事前質問にも少し入ってるんですけども、私は個人的にこの日本がベンチマークする国は英国とドイツだと思ってます。で、英国は同じ島国というよく似た国なんですが、もう一つドイツは産業構造が非常によく似てるという意味で、私は英国とドイツをいろいろ研究させてもらってます。そういう意味で今日非常に参考になる情報をいただきました。で、ただ日本とドイツの最大の違い、今日お話を聞いて改めて思うのは、隣国との輸出入調整が日本の場合は非常に難しい。2050年には可能になるかもしれませんが、それで2050年のドイツの目標値、私はちょっと古いデータかもしれませんが、風力を 45% まで高めたいというふうにあったと思います。で、先ほど事務局の資料3のですね、19ページにドイツの2日間の需給のデータがグラフで出ておりました。このデータを見て改めてびっくりするんですけども、例えば風力っていうのは今年間平均風力比率は 12% ですけども、2日間の中で少ない時は 3% から 5%、多い時で 40% 以上の構成比になります。で、太陽光の方は平均 6% なんですけども、これは当然日中高くて 30%、夜はゼロ。で、太陽光の方は要するに発電の予想はできるんですけども、風力っていうのは風次第というところがあって、 この平均 12% の時でも 5% から 40% まで発電がこう上下する中で、国全体の風力比率を 45% まで高めた時のこの2日間みたいなデータを書いた時に、私愕然としましたよ。一体どんな比率なんだろうかと。で、先ほど枝広さんの質問にも関係するんですけど、結局その2050年までにはその蓄電技術が進歩するだろうと、あるいは需給調整のそのスマート化がもう今考える以上にものすごく進歩するという前提条件なんですが、もし仮にですね、ドイツの隣国であるフランスやチェコが全く原子力も石炭でも発電しない国、ドイツと同じように再生エネルギー、太陽光と風力に頼った国になったとしても、ドイツはこういう目標を達成できるとお考えか。もしできるなら日本はそれが非常に参考になるということだと思います。もし何かあればコメントいただきたいと思います。
Yeah, number one, we have modeled this, and even the European Commission has commissioned a couple of studies on this. If you look to the EU Energy Roadmap 2050. Which was done in 2011, and where I had the honor to be in the advisory group to the Energy Commissioner, there you will also find one scenario which is called the high renewables. And there is really, on an hourly basis, there is also a transformation not only in Germany but also in the other countries as modeled. Again, you know that France has the target to reduce the nuclear share to 50%, and others will do. We have interesting developments in the Czech Republic. So in the end of the day, this is manageable. And I think the 2 days graph you have here is a bit misleading, because that's an extreme day. If you look to my paper, I have the average numbers also on an hourly basis. So it's not that dramatic for the next, let's say, 15 to 20 years, because in the end of the day, you always have let's say 4 options to deal with this variable structure. The first is to find a consumer, might using by grid, but also by flexible demand. So we have in between big companies who try to switch on their installations if the price is low. Then in these hours here, you have a 0 price at the electricity exchange, or even a negative price that makes it very attractive for consumers. So it's looking for new consumers is one strategy. The second is certainly storage in different ways, and there the notion has extremely changed. We had traditionally a strong focus on onshore wind, small share of PV and almost no offshore wind. The notion is just changing significantly. We will see much more PV, which is much more reliable in terms you can combine these with batteries, etc. We will have much more offshore wind than we thought before, and we will have significantly less onshore wind than we thought before. And in the combination, so you have load factors of 0.5 for offshore wind, even more than 0.5. You have the combination with batteries, etc., etc. So storage is always another option. So short-term storage. The third issue is to produce other new synthetic fuels from the surplus energy. Although I must admit that this is a very long-term issue and probably very expensive, because producing hydrogen or producing synthetic methane with a significant investment for 1,000 hours of surplus electricity can't be economic. It won't be economic. And therefore there's a lot of debate on this third track. And the fourth track is always curtailment. So if you curtail 3% of the surplus electricity, doesn't matter. And you always have to optimize between these four strategies. And for the time being, it is about demand flexibility, and there again, I said this before, the network integration offers benefits, but it also offers burdens. And I think you should always look for the two issues. If you roll out renewables in Japan, then there will be less fossil power generation. In Germany, there's no less fossil power generation because also the coal-fired power plants simply export. So you should always bear in mind these two sides of the coin. And if you turn these into industrial policy terms, each country of the world, and we see these very cheap renewables, need to deal with the flexibility. And there are only a few regions in the world which are so heavily interconnected like Europe. You don't have this in the United States. You don't have this in many, many parts of Asia. You never have this in Africa, etc. And you have rarely you have this in Latin America. That means the non-grid flexibility options will be a major future market. And I think the question is this an issue for high-tech nations like Germany, where the competitive advantage is not to deliver technologies, but deliver systems? And flexibility is about managing systems. And therefore, number one, this is an opportunity from my perspective rather than a burden. And secondly, it creates the need to have smart market designs. Because this situation can be managed if you have a very fundamental, very rigid price signal from the wholesale market which says if there is a surplus, then there is a zero price or a negative price, which makes the conventional power generators more flexible or incentivizes power consumers to shift their consumption patterns. But these two challenges are issues where, let's say, the lead market will come from high governance countries, because both the market design and the technology only can be developed in countries which have a clear focus on a clear market design and which have a clear focus on technology.
ありがとうございます。山崎委員お願いします。
はい、マティさん、今日どうもありがとうございます。先にのご質問とまさに近いのですけれども、ベースロード、ミドルロードが徐々に姿を消すという中で、それはやはりヨーロッパ内の系統に今は頼っている部分が大きいと思うんですが、日本のような島国を考えたときに、それを実現するためには、先ほど3つ4つのヒントを教えてくださいましたけれども、特に水素などの活用についてはドイツはどのように考えていらっしゃるか、もし補足があれば追加でお願いいたします。
Okay, I just was asked to be very short, and the answer to this question makes it not easy to be very short. I think hydrogen is a long-term issue because it is investment, and you need heavy investments, so the electrolysis is expensive. You have in the application comparatively low energy efficiency because of the the transformation losses. And so if I see this is a long-term issue which, however, builds the fundament if the system needs to go to these novel fuels. And so we have a lot of discussions on power to liquids. We have a lot of debate on power to synthetic methane, but the first step for all this is hydrogen. And therefore it is probably one of the innovations, or one of the very fundamental innovations which is needed if the emission reduction targets goes to 70, 80, 90%, but not before. And so hydrogen is a backstop technology, but is probably not a technology, at least for Europe and Germany, which will play a major role during the next 15 to 20 years. During the next 15 to 20 years, at least according to our analysis, electrification is the key strategy on this. However, a lot of work needs to be done on hydrogen production. We need electrolysis. Number one, cheap. It must be cheaper. Secondly, it must fit into the variable nature of renewables. And so the electrolysis, so we don't need base load electrolysis. We need flexible electrolysis, and then we need applications which are suitable to hydrogen. So the strategy for the time being in Germany will be to blend hydrogen into the natural gas networks. So the existing technical standards in Germany allow a share of 10% hydrogen blended into the natural gas. And that will, for the time being, that will be the strategy. And then the question is, how suitable are the pipeline structures to higher shares of hydrogen? How the storage structures are suitable to hydrogen. So we have, in Austria, we have the first natural gas storage, which is also licensed for hydrogen. And we need the gas turbine where the blades are suitable to hydrogen. Because it is not only about the fuel cell, we need to think about also, let's say, the technologies we need in terms of flexibility, cheap gas turbines, but the gas turbines we have today are not suitable for hydrogen. And so we need to develop this to have this option in place beyond 2030, but there's a lot of work which needs to be done. I'm a little bit more skeptic on hydrogen in the transportation sector. That is probably not for cars, so there I see the major focus on electric mobility, but we have the issue of the freight transport. We have the issue of navigation. We have the issue of aviation. But there, hydrogen competes with other ways of these novel fuels, and so we need to invest. We have to look, and during the course of the 2020-2030s, we have to somehow to build a level playing field where these options can compete with each other. But again, I see hydrogen as a fundamental basic technology, but for the last phase of the transition.
ありがとうございました。まだまだご質問もあろうかと思いますけれども、ちょっと時間もしておりますことと、松さんの最後のページにちゃんとアドレスを書いていただいていますので、我々いつでも質問ができますので、改めてまた松さんにいろいろ教えていただこうと思います。松さん、本日はありがとうございました。Thank you. Thank you so much. それではここで、後半でちょっと後半のプレゼンテーターのこちらに来てもらって、その間ちょっと30秒1分ほどちょっとお待ちください。